A teacher stands accused of something almost unthinkable. 4 months she allegedly plotted, planned, and schemed. Her target? A teenage student who trusted her. Her goal? To deliver this child to her adult boyfriend for sex. But that's just the beginning of what investigators uncovered when they started digging into the messages, the conversations, and the calculated steps this educator allegedly took. Right now, a 36-year-old woman named Elizabeth Love, who went by Jamie to most people, sits behind bars facing charges that could destroy her life forever. And her 42-year-old boyfriend? He's locked up too. Both are accused of sex trafficking a minor. The evidence against them reads like something out of a nightmare. Text messages discussing grooming strategies, conversations about finding the right girl, and plans stretching back months before anything physical allegedly happened. Here's what makes this case different from the disturbing teacher scandals we've seen before. This wasn't a split-second mistake. This wasn't a boundary that got crossed in a moment of poor judgment. According to prosecutors, this was a deliberate, methodical campaign that began in April and didn't come to a head until October. 6 months of planning. 6 months of building trust with a vulnerable teenager. 6 months of allegedly preparing to commit an unspeakable act. The victim in this case is a 16-year-old girl. She was a student who worked with Jamie for years because Jamie specialized in teaching deaf students across southern Nebraska. This wasn't a random kid. This was someone Jamie knew well, someone who trusted her, someone who considered her more than just a teacher. The relationship had grown so close that this teenager actually planned to move in with Jamie during the week just to attend school in a different district. Think about that for a second. This girl trusted her teacher so much that she was willing to leave her own home, her own family, to live under Jamie's roof. She saw Jamie as a mentor, maybe even a mother figure. Someone safe. Someone who would protect her. Instead, according to police and court documents, Jamie allegedly saw this girl as prey. The story gets worse. According to investigators, Jamie didn't just fail to protect this student. She actively worked to deliver her to an adult man for sexual purposes. And when the plan finally unfolded in October at a supposed pizza party, the girl said no, tried to leave, and then watched as Jamie allegedly followed her in a car before handing over a $100 gift card. Was it hush money? Jamie says no. Prosecutors will argue otherwise. But here's the question that should be burning in your mind right now. How did this happen? How does a trusted educator, a mother of 2 children herself, allegedly transform into someone capable of such betrayal? How do 2 adults convince themselves that grooming a child is acceptable? And what exactly did their text messages reveal about their plans? We're going to answer all of those questions. We're going to walk through the timeline step by step, from the first alleged conversations in April all the way through to the arrests in late October. We're going to examine the evidence, break down the charges, and explore what legal experts say about a case this disturbing. You're going to hear about the warning signs this brave teenager recognized, and how she found the courage to walk away and report what happened. You're going to learn about the legal concept of sex trafficking and why these defendants face that charge even though no actual rape occurred. And you're going to understand why cases like this might be more common than we want to believe. This is more than just another bad teacher story. This is about the abuse of power at its most calculated. It's about trust being weaponized. It's about 2 adults who allegedly spent half a year planning to harm a child. So stay with me because the details of this case reveal something important about how grooming actually works, how predators operate, and how one teenager's courage may have prevented something truly horrific. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand not just what happened, but why it matters, and what we can all learn from it. Let's begin. Our story takes place in Holdridge, Nebraska. If you're not familiar with the geography, Holdridge is a small city. We're talking about 5,000 people total. It sits roughly 2.5 hours southeast of Lincoln, the state capital. This is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where teachers are respected pillars of the community, and where parents trust the schools to keep their children safe. Elizabeth Love, though she went by her middle name, Jamie, in most settings, was 36 years old when this case exploded. To her students, she was known as Ms. Love. Looking back now, there's a grim irony in that title given what she's accused of doing. Jamie didn't work for one specific school. Instead, she was employed by something called Educational Services Unit 11, or ESU 11 for short. This organization helps oversee and support public schools throughout southern Nebraska. Jamie's specialty was working with deaf students, providing speech therapy and educational services. Her job required her to travel extensively. Investigators say she worked with teenagers across as many as 15 different public schools in the southern part of the state. Think about what that means. Jamie wasn't confined to one building, one principal, one set of colleagues watching her every move. She traveled from school to school, working one-on-one or in small groups with students who had special needs. These were vulnerable kids who depended on her expertise. They needed her to communicate, to learn, to succeed academically. And according to prosecutors, she exploited that access. Jamie's personal life included 2 children of her own. She was a mother. Someone who presumably understood the protective instincts parents have, the trust they place in teachers, the vulnerability of teenagers. But Jamie also had a boyfriend, and this is where the other defendant enters our story. His name is Jarid Krause, though he went by Jack. That's what we'll call him throughout this investigation. Jack was 42 years old, 6 years older than Jamie. According to the evidence that would later emerge, Jack wasn't just Jamie's romantic partner. He allegedly became her co-conspirator in a plan that would shock investigators and the community alike. On the surface, they probably looked like an ordinary couple. 2 adults in a relationship blending their lives together. But beneath that surface, prosecutors allege something dark was taking shape. Let's jump to April of this year. Specifically April 8th. This is the date that keeps appearing in court documents, because this is allegedly when everything started. Jamie and Jack were texting. Not unusual for a couple in a relationship. But the content of these messages, that's what makes them evidence in a criminal case. According to the affidavit filed by investigators, Jamie and Jack began discussing the idea of grooming one of Jamie's students on April 8th. Let me pause there because that word, grooming, is crucial. Grooming isn't something that happens by accident. It's a deliberate process where an adult manipulates a child, building trust and breaking down boundaries, creating a situation where abuse can occur. Predators use grooming to confuse victims, making them feel special or chosen, while slowly normalizing inappropriate behavior. The fact that Jamie and Jack were allegedly discussing grooming in April, 6 months before the October incident that would lead to arrests, tells us this wasn't impulsive. This was strategic. The subject of their discussion was a specific 16-year-old girl. This wasn't a random student Jamie had just met. According to the affidavit, this was someone Jamie had worked with for years. The relationship between teacher and student had grown close, so close that it extended far beyond the normal boundaries of an educational relationship. The student herself later told police that she and Jamie talked about things in her life that went way beyond what you'd expect from a speech therapist or educator. They developed what felt like a personal friendship. And here's how deep that trust ran. This teenage girl was actually planning to move in with Jamie during the week so she could attend school in a different district. Let that sink in. A 16-year-old girl trusted her teacher so completely that she was willing to live under that teacher's roof, away from her own family, just to pursue educational opportunities. That's an extraordinary level of trust and vulnerability. But according to investigators, Jamie and Jack saw an opportunity. The communications between Jamie and the student didn't happen through official school channels. They weren't using student email addresses or school-approved platforms. Instead, they were texting on personal phones. They were messaging through Facebook Messenger. They were using private email accounts. From an investigative standpoint, that's an immediate red flag. Teachers have legitimate reasons to communicate with students, but those communications should generally happen through channels that schools can monitor and parents can access. When a teacher starts moving conversations to private, off-the-record platforms, that's concerning. It suggests an awareness that the communications might not pass scrutiny. Investigators eventually gained access to Jamie's text messages, particularly her conversations with Jack. What they found painted a disturbing picture of 2 adults actively planning to sexually exploit a child. Remember, we're still in April when these conversations begin. And according to court documents, Jamie and Jack set a target date, August. That was their goal, their deadline for this plan to come to fruition. They wanted to see if the student was feeling it, their words. They even discussed creating some kind of code phrase that would help them determine if this teenager was interested in what they had planned. The messages get worse. Jamie allegedly texted Jack saying, "I hope it works out. If she doesn't want to, then I'll keep looking." Read that again. I'll keep looking. As if this student was interchangeable. As if there was a lineup of potential victims just waiting to be selected. Jack's response, according to the affidavit, was equally chilling. "We'll find the girl that appreciates us for what we are and provide. Someone who sees the value of our family and one that loves us both more than anything." This language is manipulative and predatory. They're framing potential abuse as if it's some kind of gift, something a victim should appreciate. They're talking about finding someone who will love us both, blurring the lines between a romantic relationship between adults and the sexual exploitation of a child. The conversations continued. Jamie allegedly mentioned drawing up foster care paperwork for the girl. Think about the implications there. They were discussing making this arrangement official, legal, permanent. Bringing a vulnerable teenager into their home under the guise of providing care and support. Jack expressed some hesitation, asking if it was time for that step. He acknowledged it was a huge risk, and wondered if they might not find the right girl for them. But Jamie's alleged response is perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire exchange. "I know, but I also don't have to take them all even though I want to. Haha. I don't have to take them all even though I want to." This suggests the plan extended beyond one victim. Jamie allegedly indicated she wanted multiple girls. And that, haha, at the end? It's casual, almost playful, as if they were discussing something mundane rather than the systematic abuse of children. These messages reveal planning, deliberation, and intent. From a legal standpoint, they're devastating evidence. These aren't ambiguous statements that could be interpreted different ways. These are explicit conversations about grooming and exploiting minors. We've reached August, the deadline Jamie and Jack allegedly set back in April. Remember, their goal was to see if the student was interested by this point. They'd spent months building trust, getting closer, presumably breaking down the normal boundaries between teacher and student. According to reporting from People magazine, the student remembers being in Jamie's car in August when something significant happened. Jamie took a phone call from Jack while the girl was present in the vehicle. During this call, Jack allegedly mentioned wanting to have sex with Jamie. Now, having that kind of conversation in front of a student is already inappropriate. But then Jamie allegedly took it a step further. She started chatting with this teenage girl, saying she would be willing to share him. Put yourself in that student's shoes for a moment. You're 16 years old. You're in the car with your teacher, someone you trust and respect. She takes a call from her boyfriend where sex gets discussed, and then she turns to you and suggests sharing her romantic partner. That's confusing. It's uncomfortable. It crosses every professional boundary that should exist between an educator and a student. But because of the grooming that had allegedly been happening for months, because of the close relationship and the blurred boundaries, this teenager might not have immediately recognized how wrong the situation was. That's exactly how grooming works. It normalizes the abnormal, making victims question their own instincts. Later on, there were plans for the student to go to the state fair with Jamie. This would have been another opportunity for Jamie and Jack to spend time with this girl away from other adults, away from the protective oversight of parents or school staff. But something was bothering the student. Some instinct was telling her this didn't feel right. So instead of going to the fair with Jamie, she called her aunt. She got out of the situation. She created distance. This is remarkable. A 16-year-old girl, in the middle of what she probably thought was a friendship with a trusted adult, had the awareness and the courage to recognize something was off and remove herself. That takes strength, especially when you're a teenager and the adult in question is someone you've looked up to for years. Unfortunately, backing away from the state fair didn't end the story. Jamie didn't take the hint. She didn't respect the boundaries the student was trying to establish. Instead, according to prosecutors, Jamie escalated. We're now in October, specifically October 9th. 2 months have passed since the August incident, since the student backed away from going to the fair. You might think Jamie would have gotten the message. You might think she'd recognize that this teenager wasn't interested in whatever she and Jack had planned. Instead, according to allegations, Jamie allegedly began asking the student inappropriate questions. Specifically, sexual questions. The exact nature of these questions isn't detailed in public documents, but the fact that investigators categorize them as inappropriate and sexual tells us they crossed a line. This represents a shift in strategy. The subtle grooming, the careful building of trust, the blurring of boundaries, all of that was allegedly giving way to more direct approaches. Jamie was testing to see how the student would respond to explicitly sexual topics. The student was now in an incredibly difficult position. This was her teacher, someone she'd known for years, someone she'd trusted enough to consider living with. But that teacher was now asking questions that made her uncomfortable, questions that she knew weren't appropriate. 2 days later, on October 11th, everything came to a head. October 11th is the date that would ultimately lead to criminal charges, arrests, and this entire case becoming public. This is when the alleged plan that started back in April finally moved from discussion to action. Jamie invited the student over to her home. The pretext was innocent enough: a pizza party. There would be food, a movie, and a casual hangout. According to local news station Live News 5, there were also going to be 2 young boys present. The whole setup appeared to be a normal, family-friendly gathering. Nothing threatening. Nothing suspicious. The 16-year-old girl agreed to come over. Why wouldn't she? Despite the uncomfortable questions from 2 days earlier, despite the weird conversation in the car back in August, Jamie was still her teacher. This was still someone she'd known for years. And a pizza party with other kids present seemed safe enough. Jamie picked the girl up and drove her back to the house. Once they arrived, the atmosphere allegedly changed quickly. According to the student's later report to investigators, Jack led her upstairs to a bedroom. They were alone. And then Jack allegedly asked her to have sex with him. This is the moment 6 months of alleged grooming had been building toward. This is what Jamie and Jack had supposedly been discussing, planning, and preparing for since April. An adult man, the boyfriend of this girl's teacher, requesting sex from a 16-year-old child. The student's response was immediate and clear. No. She refused. And she asked to leave right away. Think about the courage that took. She was in an adult's home, upstairs in a bedroom, being propositioned by a 42-year-old man. Many victims in similar situations freeze. They comply out of fear or confusion or because the grooming process has made them feel like they can't refuse. But this teenager said no and demanded to be taken home. Jack apparently didn't physically prevent her from leaving. She made it out of the bedroom, out of the house, and started walking. She pulled out her phone trying to call her dad. She needed help. She needed to get away from this situation and back to safety. But here's where things get even more disturbing. Security camera footage would later show this teenage girl leaving Jamie's house on foot, walking toward her own home. She's trying to put distance between herself and the house where she was just propositioned for sex. She's upset, probably scared, definitely confused about what just happened with adults she thought she could trust. And the cameras also show Jamie getting into her car and following the girl. Picture this scene. A teenage girl walking quickly down a residential street, phone in hand, trying to reach her father. Behind her, her teacher's car slowly rolling along, keeping pace. What was going through that girl's mind? Was she frightened that Jamie might try to bring her back to the house? Was she worried about what would happen next? Eventually, the security footage shows the girl getting into Jamie's car. We don't know exactly what was said, what convinced her to get in, but she did. And Jamie drove her home. This is when the $100 gift card enters the picture. According to the affidavit, Jamie gave the student $100 via gift card once they reached the girl's home. When investigators later questioned Jamie about this payment, she had an explanation ready. This wasn't hush money, she insisted. This was to help the student purchase a new cell phone. But prosecutors aren't buying that explanation, and it's not hard to see why. A teenage girl was just taken to a house under false pretenses, led to a bedroom and propositioned for sex by an adult man. She refused, tried to leave, and was followed by her teacher. And then that teacher hands her $100 in gift cards right after the incident. The timing is suspicious. The amount is significant. And the explanation, that a teacher was just being generous about a phone purchase, doesn't hold up under scrutiny. If Jamie regularly helped students with expenses, there would be a pattern of similar gifts to other kids. If this was truly about helping with a phone, why not do it through official channels or in a more transparent way? Legal experts would later point out that it doesn't matter what Jamie intended the money to be. What matters is how a reasonable person would interpret it. A teenager who just said no to sex and then receives money from the adults who put her in that situation is going to understand it as payment to stay quiet. The girl made it home safely on October 11th. But the story didn't end there because this brave teenager did something crucial. She started talking. Not to Jamie, who was sending text messages asking her to come back and talk to me, but to people who could actually help. On October 14th, just 3 days after the pizza party incident, a report was made to law enforcement. Someone called the police about possible grooming and a student being put in a sexually suggestive situation by a teacher. We don't know if the girl reported it herself or if she told someone who then made the call, but either way, the wheels of justice were starting to turn. Once police were involved, the investigation moved quickly. Investigators interviewed the student and got her detailed account of everything that had happened, from the years of building a close relationship with Jamie, through the uncomfortable conversations in August and the sexual questions in October, to the final incident at the house with Jack. But investigators didn't just rely on the victim's testimony. They did something even more powerful. They got the text messages. Remember all those conversations between Jamie and Jack from April onward? The discussions about grooming, about finding the right girl, about August being the target date? All of that became evidence. They also found the messages between Jamie and the student. The communications that happened off official school channels, through private texts and Facebook Messenger and personal emails. The pattern of inappropriate relationship building that set the stage for everything that followed. On October 15, investigators brought Jamie in for an interview. This was her chance to explain herself, to provide context, to maybe present an innocent explanation for everything that looked so damning on paper. Jamie denied it all. According to her account, Jack never made any advances toward the student. The $100 gift card wasn't hush money, it was genuinely for the student's phone. The whole situation was being misunderstood and blown out of proportion. But denials don't erase text messages. Explanations don't change security camera footage. And investigators had built a case that went far beyond one person's word against another. 9 days after the interview on October 24, both Jamie and Jack were arrested. Elizabeth Jamie Love now faces multiple charges: sex trafficking of a minor and third-degree sexual assault or abuse by an employee. Jarid Jack Krause faces charges of sex trafficking of a minor. Let's break down what these charges actually mean, because there's a common misconception about sex trafficking that's worth addressing. Many people hear sex trafficking and think it requires that sex actually occurred or that money changed hands, or that someone was transported across state lines. But that's not accurate under modern trafficking statutes. Sex trafficking charges can apply when someone recruits, entices, harbors, or transports a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, and the person is under 18 years old. The key word there is purpose. You don't have to successfully complete the act. You don't have to exchange money. The crime is in the inducing, the luring, the setting up of a situation where a minor would be exploited. In this case, prosecutors alleged that Jamie and Jack lured a 16-year-old to a house specifically so that Jack could have sex with her. That meets the definition of sex trafficking. The fact that the girl said no and left before any sex occurred doesn't eliminate the crime, it just means the attempt was unsuccessful. The third-degree sexual assault charge against Jamie adds another layer. This acknowledges her specific position of authority as a teacher. She wasn't just any adult who tried to facilitate the abuse of a minor. She was an educator who exploited her professional relationship with a student. Criminal defense attorneys who've analyzed this case point out several factors that make it particularly strong for prosecutors. First, there's the digital evidence. Months of text messages showing planning and intent. Second, there's the clear victim testimony from a credible source who immediately reported what happened. Third, there's physical evidence like security camera footage and the gift card transaction. And fourth, there's the abuse of position that makes the crime even more egregious. If convicted, both defendants face serious penalties. Prison time is almost certain for offenses of this nature. Registration as sex offenders would likely be mandatory. And for Jamie specifically, her teaching career is over regardless of how the criminal case concludes. One question keeps coming up in cases like this: is this happening more often, or are we just hearing about it more? Criminal defense attorney William Corman, who's analyzed numerous teacher misconduct cases, offers an interesting perspective. He believes these offenses have always existed, but several factors make them more visible now. First, law enforcement has better tools for investigating, particularly when it comes to digital evidence. Text messages, emails, social media, all of this creates a trail that didn't exist decades ago. Second, victims are more empowered to report. There's greater awareness of what grooming looks like, more support systems in place for kids who speak up, and less stigma around coming forward. The student in this case recognized warning signs and took action. That's partly because we've gotten better at teaching young people to trust their instincts and report inappropriate behavior. Third, these cases get more media attention now. When a teacher is arrested for abusing their position, it becomes news. That wasn't always true. Past generations might have quietly handled such situations or swept them under the rug to avoid scandal. But here's the uncomfortable truth: the fact that we're catching more perpetrators doesn't mean there aren't others out there still getting away with it. For every case that makes headlines, how many others involve victims who don't report, evidence that isn't found, or warning signs that get missed? Investigators in Nebraska are now conducting what they call a deep dive into Jamie's communications and contacts. She worked with students across 15 different schools over multiple years. That's a lot of potential victims. So far, police have said it doesn't appear any other students were affected. But they're still looking. There will probably be community meetings at the schools where Jamie worked. Law enforcement will encourage parents to talk to their children, to ask if anything inappropriate ever happened, to watch for signs of trauma or discomfort. It's a painful process for a community, but it's necessary. To understand how this case developed, you need to understand how grooming actually works. It's not random. It's not impulsive. It's a calculated process that predators follow, often without even realizing they're following a pattern. Stage 1 is target selection. Predators look for vulnerable kids. Maybe someone from a troubled home, someone who's isolated, someone who seems to need extra attention. In this case, the student was a deaf child who needed specialized educational support. That made her dependent on Jamie in a way other students might not be. Stage 2 is relationship building. The predator establishes trust and affection. They become the fun teacher, the understanding adult, the person who gets the kid when nobody else does. Boundaries start to blur. The relationship extends beyond the professional setting. Personal information gets shared. The kid starts to see the adult as more than just a teacher. Stage 3 is filling a need. Maybe the kid needs help with something. School supplies, rides, even just someone to talk to. The predator becomes the problem solver, creating a sense of debt and obligation. In this case, Jamie was allegedly offering to let the student live with her during the week for school. That's filling a pretty significant need. Stage 4 is isolation. The predator works to separate the victim from other support systems. Communications move to private channels. The kid is told that their relationship is special, that others wouldn't understand, that some things should stay between them. Notice how Jamie and this student weren't using school email or official platforms. That's intentional isolation. Stage 5 is sexualization. The predator introduces sexual content gradually. Maybe through jokes or discussions about relationships, or educational conversations about sex. The goal is to normalize sexual topics until asking for sex itself doesn't seem like such a huge leap. Jamie allegedly asked sexual questions in October. That fits this pattern. Stage 6 is the actual abuse, followed by maintenance. Once abuse occurs, the predator works to keep the victim compliant and quiet. That might involve gifts, threats, guilt, or emphasizing how much the victim wanted it or enjoyed it. This case showcases nearly every stage except for completed abuse, and that's only because this particular teenager had the strength and awareness to stop the process. She recognized something was wrong and got out before reaching the final stage. There's something particularly disturbing when the perpetrator is a teacher. We entrust educators with our children for hours every day. We expect them to protect, nurture, and guide kids toward becoming healthy adults. Teachers are mandatory reporters. They're supposed to watch for signs of abuse and report it, not become the abusers themselves. Many states have started passing specific laws that add enhanced penalties when someone in a position of authority, teachers, coaches, clergy, counselors, abuses that position to exploit minors. New Hampshire recently passed such a statute. Nebraska, where this case is being prosecuted, has enhanced charges for people in positions of trust. The reasoning is straightforward. When a teacher abuses a student, the harm extends beyond the immediate victim. It damages the student's ability to trust any authority figure. It creates trauma that can affect educational outcomes for years. And it violates a sacred social contract between schools, parents, and communities. Parents send their kids to school assuming they'll be safe. When that assumption proves wrong, when the very person supposed to protect a child instead exploits them, the betrayal is profound. Throughout this entire sordid story, there's one person who deserves recognition, the 16-year-old student who said no. Think about everything working against her. She'd known Jamie for years. She trusted her. She'd developed what felt like a genuine friendship. She was planning to live in Jamie's home. When uncomfortable situations arose, she had to overcome the cognitive dissonance of believing that someone she cared about might actually mean her harm. But she listened to her instincts. In August, when plans were made to go to the state fair, she felt something was off and called her aunt instead. In October, when asked inappropriate sexual questions, she didn't brush it off as normal. And most importantly, when Jack propositioned her, she immediately refused and demanded to leave. Then she reported it. Within 3 days of the pizza party incident, law enforcement was contacted. That meant going through the painful process of admitting what happened, describing uncomfortable details, facing the possibility that some people might not believe her. Victims often stay quiet because they blame themselves, or because they're afraid, or because the perpetrator has convinced them that what happened was somehow their fault. This girl didn't stay quiet. She spoke up, and by doing so, she not only protected herself but potentially prevented Jack and Jamie from victimizing other students. As this case moves forward through the legal system, several things will happen. Jamie has been placed on administrative leave from her position with ESU 11. That's standard procedure when a teacher faces criminal charges. But regardless of how the criminal case turns out, her teaching career is effectively over. Even if she's acquitted, which seems unlikely given the evidence, no school district will hire someone accused of grooming a student. She'll almost certainly lose her teaching license. State licensing boards don't use the same standard of proof as criminal courts. They can revoke credentials based on conduct that violates professional standards, even if criminal charges don't result in conviction. Both Jamie and Jack will go through the court process. They might take plea deals to avoid trial. If they go to trial, a jury will hear all of this evidence: the text messages, the victim's testimony, the security footage. Based on similar cases, convictions seem likely, which would mean prison time and sex offender registration. There's also the possibility of civil litigation. The student and her family could file lawsuits against Jamie and Jack personally. They might also sue ESU 11 or the school districts involved, especially if evidence emerges that warning signs were missed or complaints were ignored. For the victim, there will be a long healing process. Even though no physical sexual assault occurred, the betrayal of trust and the psychological manipulation she experienced can cause lasting trauma. She'll need support, possibly therapy, and understanding as she processes what happened. This case is one of those that truly makes you question how far some people will go to abuse their power. A teacher, a mother, a predator. Thankfully, one brave student refused to stay silent, and because of her, justice might finally be served. What are your thoughts on this disturbing case? Let's hear them in the comments section below. I read every single one. And if you want to see more stories that expose the truth behind shocking crimes like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring awareness to cases that deserve to be heard. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and thanks for watching.